So Mrs. Wright and I were talking the other day, and I was bragging about how I can still jump on the highest box in my garage, like the workout jump boxes like that you do for CrossFit or whatever. I'm not a CrossFitter, but I do jumps. And the reason why I do that is because your type 2 twitch, your fast twitch muscles are absolutely imperative as you get older. Getting older gracefully is something that I am keenly dialed in on. I want to slow the aging process as much as possible. The older I get, I want to make sure that I'm still active and able to take care of my grandbabies. My oldest daughter is getting married next year, so the thing that will probably follow that is some grandbabies, and I want my grandbabies to be able to I want to be able to keep up with them, have fun, and that sort of thing. So exercise is absolutely paramount to my overall health and wellness protocol, but also supplementation is key. The bottom line is we just have such a hard time getting all the dense nutrients we need for peak performance in our food sources. We also have a hard time being able to defend ourselves against the toxins that are in the air, in the water, just all around us throughout our everyday life. So to that end, what I try to do is supplement with different forms of supplements that make the most sense, like creatine and some other things. But the one that is a staple of my diet is Authentic Health, the foundational stack from Authentic Health. And this episode of The Jason Wright Show is brought to you by Authentic Health, which you can find our foundational stack at shopauthentic.health.com. It's a supplement company that I co-founded with Dr. Gus Vickery, who has 30 years of clinical experience treating patients and checking their blood panels and figuring out what most of us are deficit in. That is where this formulation originated. In Authentic Health, we believe optimal health starts at the cellular level. That's why we created the Authentic Health Stack, a science-based foundational supplement system designed to help your body function the way it was meant to. No gimmicks, no trendy shortcuts, just real clinically formulated nutrition that supports energy, recovery, focus, and longevity. If you're ready to feel better, think clearer, and age stronger, go to shopauthentic.health.com and start building your foundation for lasting health today. And don't forget to use promo code Jason at checkout. That's going to give you a 10% discount off your first order. I hope you'll check it out. Now, enjoy the show. Today's guest is pastor, leader, and entrepreneur Jackson Lahmeyer. Jackson Lahmeyer serves as the lead pastor of the historic Sheridan Christian Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, now known as Sheridan Church. He is the founder of Pastors for Trump. Jackson and his wife Kendra have 5 children and reside in Owasso, Oklahoma. Lahmeyer attended Oral Roberts University, ORU, and received a BA and MA in Theological and Historical Studies. After graduating magna cum laude, Lahmeyer was then appointed to serve as the crusade director traveling the United States for Christ for All Nations, the ministry of Reinhard Bonnke, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, that has helped lead 74 million people to Christ since 1974. While serving as the crusade director, Lahmeyer served as the Oklahoma State coordinator for the Billy Graham Evangelic Association, leading more than 300 churches across Oklahoma's 77 counties to get engaged and fight for conservative values. In 2021 and 2022, Lahmeyer was a candidate for the United States Senate in Oklahoma. He was endorsed by Mayor Rudy Giuliani, General Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Sebastian Gorka, Mike Lindell, and other America First leaders. This was a great conversation with, and one of the things not in his bio, he's also the author of the new book, Chasing After the Wind, which discusses how in this day and age, especially amongst young people, but adults as well, we get caught up in this perfection, this falsehood of perfection, rather, that's presented on social media and other platforms. And what this book talks about is how chasing after these false idols and these things that are fleeting and fading is like chasing after the wind. It's a great book. This is a great conversation about kind of the state of America. Jackson talks about how he got involved with the Trump administration, eventually finding himself as one of the first members of the White House Faith Office that President Trump established. And so I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. And if you do, please leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a 5-star rating. That will really help us in the rankings. And with that, here's my conversation with Jackson Lahmeyer. Thanks for listening. Jackson Lahmeyer, welcome to the Jason Wright Show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. It's an honor. Love what you're doing, and looking forward to today.
Well, I appreciate it. This is such a timely conversation, man. I've been excited about getting you on for some time because I think we are at a time in our nation where we as believers of Christ, as Christians, as Christ followers, it's one of those things that if you look through the course of history of the church, then you kind of, at least I do, I get a little bit of relief realizing that, okay, the good news is we're not going to be in the lion's den. We're not going to be dipped and waxed and thrown out amongst the, to fight with the gladiators, anything like that. It's not quite that bad, but we are in an odd time, in particularly in our American history as believers and as the way the culture is. So to have you on, Jackson, is really, it's a privilege, it's an honor, and I thank you for being here. And with that,
Absolutely.
I want to commend you because you have been willing to and bold enough to combine both your faith, your ministry into public policy, into public service. I know you ran for the Senate there in Oklahoma. Now, just kind of give this audience a little bit of your background, who you are, and kind of what your mission is at this point as a leader of a church, but also as kind of being willing to step out and take on some of these cultural issues and some of the things that you're doing.
Yeah, I never set out with the intentions of being involved in politics. I went to Oral Roberts University, and I did 2 degrees in church history, actually, and wanted to be in ministry, felt that's what God called me to be into. And the door opened up. I became a very young pastor. I was 25 years old when Sheridan Christian Center asked me to come be their pastor, which, I can't believe they asked a 25-year-old know-it-all kid not be the youth pastor, to be the lead pastor. And so I had to grow up quick and, was pastoring my church and trying to figure things out. And in spite of me, God kept the doors open and started to bring people and we started to grow. And then 2020 hit and you remember everything, got turned upside down. And whenever the pandemic broke out, in the city of Tulsa, they had basically decided through the mayor's office that you couldn't have public gatherings of more than 6 people. And so I decided that we were going to keep our church open. And I had no idea what that decision was going to entail. I just was like, we're going to do drive in church. I was going to get on the roof of the church and I was going to preach because at that time, none of us really knew what we were getting into, right? It was such a murky water thing. And so we just said, we're going to stay open. And that got me in the crossfire of the mayor of Tulsa. And the Saturday before our first drive-in service, we're the first church to do this in Tulsa. And I get a call from the police department letting me know that if we have church, that I will be arrested on Sunday morning for violating the edict of the mayor. And I remember thinking to myself, what just happened? This is not, if you would have told me when I was at ORU that there would come a day in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I'm not talking about New York City. I'm not talking about Los Angeles or Austin or wherever. I'm talking about Tulsa. We call it Tulsa Jerusalem here. All right. There's a church on every corner of every street. If you would have told me that I would be potentially arrested for doing drive-in church, not in person, like in the building, drive-in, I would have said, that's crazy. There's no way. And so I got off the phone with the police officer who was doing his job. They work for the mayor. And I told my wife, I was like, hey, this is something that may happen. And, she said, well, you've already said we're going to do it. So you got to do it. And so we called him back and said, hey, I just want to be polite, let you know we're going to go through with our service tomorrow. I'll be on the roof. There's a ladder in the back. So if you got to come and arrest me, that's how you can do it. And thank goodness it was all bark with no bite at all. They didn't even show up. We had drive-in church, and then that kind of taught me something. That taught me that if you stand up and you speak up, most of the people who are threatening, they cower down very quickly. And so then there came the mask mandate. You remember the masks and you remember all the stuff. And so I got thrown into these political issues. And I realized that our government officials, local officials, it wasn't the president of the United States, it was city council, it was the mayor, had crossed into my lane. And I was like, all right, we got to cross in to that lane. And so that's really got what got me thrown into it, during 2021 when Biden had declared the vaccine mandate that if you didn't have the vaccine, you couldn't have a job. I started signing exemptions for people in my church, religious exemptions. And the Washington Post found out and they did a hit piece on me. And it was about how, I'm endangering people in Tulsa because given these COVID exemptions and they wanted to interview me. And I said, I'll do the interview if you will include my website in your story. And so the journalist said, I got to get that approved by the editor. The editor approved it. They included my website. The hit piece was nasty, by the way. I didn't like myself for like 2 weeks after I read the thing. It was nasty. But thanks to the Washington Post, anytime someone went to Google and they typed in COVID-19 religious exemption form, my website popped up first. And so since then, we've signed over 75,000 religious exemptions for people all over the country. And so I kind of got thrown into it. I didn't like choose to do that. And then obviously I was asked to lead Pastors for Trump during the 2024 campaign, had a blast doing that. Now I get to serve part of the White House Faith Office, the National Faith Advisory Board. And so I wouldn't say like I chose to become quote unquote political. Kind of got tossed into it because of 2020. But then I realized most of these political issues, these are Bible issues: life, gender, marriage. I mean, you could go on, and our politicians have hijacked theological issues that as a pastor, I have a responsibility to speak to from behind the pulpit. And so that's a microcosm of a very longer story. But essentially, I got thrown into it.
So one of the things that I immediately think of there, Jackson, is like we as Christians who, I guess evoke our faith in matters of public policy or whatever. This seems to be a recurring theme. You said you didn't ask for it, and you almost got thrown into it. It's almost like we're on the playground as little kids. You got that punk that comes up and is like pointing their finger right in your face, but not quite touching. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. And then finally, whenever you slap the finger out of the way, then that person goes running to the teacher and saying, he hit me.
Yep.
That's a lot of the way it seems that Christians in particular get pulled into these battles that we never asked for. And I think what you just described is that very case. It seems like there's more and more that it's obviously it's an effective tactic. If you can go provoke your would-be enemy, provoke. I'm not doing anything. I didn't touch them. And just whenever they finally respond, the fingers start pointing and the condemnation comes. There's no mixing of church and state. How dare you? And then all of a sudden,
Right.
Jackson Lahmeyer is saying that he knows more about medicine than any of that, and he's harming his, citizens and all this. And so,
and I got called everything. I'll tell you something funny. You're from Texas, and so this you'll catch the joke. But we were labeled a super spreader, and you remember all this stuff.
oh yeah,
But then I think it was the New York Times. Don't hold me to it. It was New York Times, or it was one of those outlets. They labeled my church the branch Covidians.
oh,
The branch, and I was as dangerous as David Koresh in the state of Oklahoma. It was wild. It was wild stuff.
that's actually pretty good. That's their part. I mean, that's pretty creative. Well. So
I thought it was funny,
It is. Well, okay, here's the thing. I want to ask you this, but this is kind of like not related necessarily to faith or anything like that, but just as a leader. I've been in that situation too, in this much smaller level as a city councilman here in Tyler. I had our newspaper attack me one time, and I'll tell you, man, until you've been in that position, when you're just watching it, you assume that the elected official, the church leader, the CEO, whomever, that they're conditioned to take that. But what they are real quick to forget is that behind that title is a human being that feels, that suffers. And I remember one time whenever I took some real major heat from the local newspaper, it stung, regardless of how self-assured, how principled I was, and how right I was in this case. Didn't matter. As a leader, as a father of, you got 5 kiddos, right?
5, yeah. I got a basketball team.
Father of 5 that, how did you deal with all of a sudden going from this pastor in Tulsa, Oklahoma, minding your own business, just trying to continue to preach the word, to all of a sudden taking a national stage that you never asked for? How did you start to deal with that? How did you personally galvanize yourself? What did your prayer life look like? What did your fellow, like I always say, iron sharpens iron? Your men that you brought around you, your family. What did that look like?
Well, it was a whirlwind for me because, when all this really started, I was 29 years old. I'd only been pastoring 4 years. I was 29. And, I still am the young pastor in Tulsa, but I was the really young pastor in Tulsa at that time. And, I had older pastors that I really respected and still do. They called me and said, you need to stop this. You're embarrassing the ministry. You just need to do the shutdown thing, go online, and, all this stuff. And I respected it. But, I had also we had already made our decision as a church. And so it was a whirlwind. And then when you start getting the hit pieces, it's because it hurts because some people believe them. That's the part that hurts, is because it's their narrative. You may be interviewed and they take one sentence of what you said and they make you sound like an absolute insane individual. And so they have this narrative about you, and it's not true, but people, unfortunately, if it's in the Washington Post, it must be true. If it was on CNN, it must be true. And so in the beginning, it was really rough. It was really, really rough. And because that was not something like I ever expected, or, like you said, signed up for. That was just not what we intended. But then when we found ourselves in it, I had some great, great mentors that stepped into my life that were from outside ministry. One of them was General Michael Flynn. He became like a dad to me in that season, and he stepped in, and that was huge. And he's not a pastor, but he's a general, and I respected him, and he kind of like shielded me and took me in. And then a business friend of mine, Clay Clark, stepped up, and it was really helpful. And then some others. And then I got in relationship with the Trump family. And then I realized, they're going through way worse than what's being said about me. And so in the beginning, it was awful. Like there's no like, oh, I, prayed, and, I walked out of my prayer closet and everything was fine. No, it was awful. It'll drive you to your knees in prayer for sure. But then you really find out who your real friends are. That was something that shocked me. Who I thought was like my friends turned not really to be my friends, and people that weren't my friends at the time have become lifelong friends through it. And so you got to have people in your life, though. That was, lone ranger faith. Isolation is not a good recipe for any leader at all. And then obviously my wife, I would say she's probably much tougher than me. Now, they weren't throwing the arrows per se at her, but she's caught up in it because here I am taking, a stand, whatever it may be. And my wife's tough as nails, and she was the one who continued. If she would have one time, if she said, "I want you to stop this, and I want you to pull back," and I would have done it. I want peace in my house. But my wife was like, "No, you're doing the right thing. You got to keep doing the right thing." And so I discovered, though, that God really knows how to make all things, even the hit pieces, work together for good. And I've learned that time and time again. So now I've become so accustomed to it. I look at it as a positive. Oh, they wrote a hit piece. Something good's going to come from this, even though, it's never fun. You never like people lying about you or misrepresenting you. And the media, unfortunately, is very, very good at misrepresenting you, but making it sound so true.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things too that I've got to say before we move on is that, like, talking about your age. So I grew up in Sulphur Springs, not too terribly far from where we border Oklahoma, and where my wife is from, Paris, is almost right uh,
Yeah.
on the Oklahoma Texas border. And growing up in a small town, a Southern Baptist town, my great grandfather was one of the guys that funded the building of First Baptist Church, Sulphur Springs. So we were the when the doors open, the rights were there. Now, we were going to be on the very back pew. We were back pew Baptist, but we were going to be there when the doors open. And my grandmother, oh my gosh, there's no telling how many times she provided the flowers that go in front of the altar.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so Mamaw, that was my grandmother. I'll never forget when Charles Redmond, he left. He was the pastor I grew up with, and he left to go to Pasadena and lead a church. And David Hardage, he came in and was pastor. And I want to say David, whenever he came, I was pretty young at the time. I was a teenager, I guess. I think he was probably like in his mid 40s or something. No, he wasn't that. He was like, he might have been late 30s, early 40s. And I'll never forget my grandmother, just, and all of her friends, he's just too young. He's too young. I'm sure he's a nice man, but he's just so young. And they were all beside themselves. This guy's nearly 40 years old. So whenever you talk about being young, it's one thing to be young in a company or something like that. I'm reading a book about Jamie Dimon right now, and how whenever he was so young at Travelers or Citigroup at 35, being president of one of their divisions or something, and that's like really young. But in the church, I mean, people, they want that young fresh face, but that young fresh face they might think mean 55 and
Yes.
versus,
Yes.
it's so crazy. So I respect that so much. Okay, so tell me about, and I always get the name wrong, but a girl that works for me, she heard I was going to be talking to you, and I told her about your involvement with the White House Faith Initiative and what's going on there, and she was just ecstatic because Caroline Levitt is like her hero, and she's a solid believer, good uh, good fellow East Texan. Tell me about how you got involved. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about getting involved with the Trump administration and the Trump family, and then give me the exact name. It's the White House Office of Faith Initiatives or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Probably wrong. Tell me what that's about, and just for anyone that's listening that doesn't even know it exists, what is it? How can we support it? How do we get involved? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it is a brand new office. It's never existed before. But to understand it, I got to go back a minute to the campaign. So in 2023, the idea was, how do we reach the largest voting bloc in America, which is evangelical voters? Unfortunately, evangelicals, they just don't turn out to vote very well. And so, how do you mobilize that voting bloc? And the strategy was, well, what if we mobilized pastors? Because a pastor can represent 60 or 600 or some even 6,000. And most congregations, they respect and they listen to their pastor. And so if their pastor simply would say, hey, you need to vote your values, well, we know what that would translate to. 8 out of 10 evangelicals are going to break towards the Republican nominee, whoever that is. In this case, it was Donald Trump. And so the strategy was, let's reach pastors. And so I got tasked with leading up that coalition. And that was a blast. I traveled primarily to all the swing states. We had 10,000 plus pastors in all 50 states, but I spent zero time recruiting pastors in the state of Oklahoma because, we knew Oklahoma was going for Trump. So I was in the swing states recruiting pastors. And on the campaign trail, President Trump said, if you pastors get me elected, I'll do something no president has ever done for you guys. I will launch a faith office in the White House. Now, other presidents have had faith initiatives. George Bush had an initiative. President Trump actually had one during his first term. But he said, we'll take it a step further. We'll make it a standalone office in the West Wing of the White. So not in some building in DC. It'll be in the West Wing with a direct report to the commander in chief because of the increase of the attack on religious liberty from our federal government. And so President Trump made that promise to the pastors as we were going out, on the campaign trail. And the one thing I love about President Trump, flaws and all, when he makes a promise, it's about certain that he's going to follow through and keep that promise. And so he did. He launched the Faith Office, which is primarily geared towards protecting religious liberty, which is foundational to the American experiment. But what a lot of people didn't realize was under Barack Obama, accelerated under Joe Biden, people of faith were being targeted by our own federal government, from the DOJ, the FBI, the ATF, but especially the IRS. So the IRS was specifically targeting Christians and pastors, conservative pastors. The rate of audits among conservative, it's unbelievable. And so the Faith Office has gone in, unraveled a lot of this targeting, has exposed it. There's so many cases that we've put on the White House official website of religious targeting, and then coming up with solutions to make sure it never happens again. Because, in America, the thought is this: nobody should get in between a patient and their doctor. We all agree with that universally. Nobody should get in between a person and God either, especially the U.S. government. You should be able to be a Christian in this nation without being concerned that the IRS is going to target you simply because you're a follower of Jesus and you happen to have a conservative bent politically. And so that's what the office is for. And it's a beautiful thing, but it goes beyond that. In the first 9 months of this administration, over 2,000 pastors have been brought to the White House to pray, worship, and saturate 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in the presence of God, which to me, I know that's not policy, but I believe that prayer happening at the White House every day is like fuel in the engine of this administration, which is just, accomplishing so many things. And so that's the Faith Office. It's brand new. It's never existed before. And so obviously anything brand new, you got to kind of figure out parameters. You got to figure out, what does this look like? And it's in the process, but good things are happening.
So you have been around the president, and I remember whenever Ted Cruz was running for president, and like I mentioned before we got on, he's a friend of mine, and I was trying to get James Robinson to support him. So it just turns out James and I have one of my best friends, who's now a state rep here in Texas, from East Texas. His parents were very, very dear friends of Pastor Robinson and his wife. And so he put us together, and I was making the case for Ted Cruz at the time. This was, the 16 primary. And one of the things that baffled a lot of people during that election was why, like a good example here in Texas was Pastor Jeffers at Dallas, whenever he supported Trump over Ted. And I remember it was this kind of this head scratching thing about what are all these evangelical pastors doing going for Trump instead of Cruz, and just based on what we know about their faith. What do people, and I remember talking to James about it, and he said he spent a lot of time with the president and at that time the candidate, and he said, I'm telling you, Jason, he said Trump is seeking. He's got a fertile heart. He wants to understand more, and he described it as kind of like that child of that faith, that childlike faith that he noticed in Trump, that he was willing to hear the gospel and to understand and ask questions, not question the gospel, but ask questions about the gospel. Has that been your case with him? Because I guarantee a lot of people are going to hear this, and and look, as a believer, I try to always be understanding that even our fellow Christians, they want to think that if someone hasn't led this outwardly exemplary life of morality or whatever, then how in the world could they ever be approved of in the public square? Forgetting that if you look through the Bible, David was kind of a rascal. We have case after case after case of who God used: prostitutes, tax collectors, King David, who was a man after his own heart, but also happened to have one of his best soldiers killed so that he could hook up with his wife. We've got these stories all over that if you ever think you can figure out who God's going to use for his purpose, good luck, you know?
Yeah.
So we know that, but a lot of people don't. They look at us as self-righteous, judgy people that are always, and so therefore they project that back on us. Oh, well, how dare you? Your experience with the president and the reality of what you've seen, how does that contrast with that sometimes, I don't want to say stupid, but ignorant, meaning in the actual definitive word ignorant, just not knowing sense that a lot of people apply to that subject as to, hey, Jackson, you as a pastor and leader of a church, how in the world could you ever support this guy that we know all these other things about?
Oh yeah, that was the question. That was the everywhere I went. In fact, there was a time I was doing an interview with a journalist from CNN, and she asked that very question. She was sincere too. She said, "Do you actually believe that God can use someone as flawed as Donald Trump with his past to accomplish, his perfect will?" And my response was, "God only uses people flawed like Donald Trump." And I cited the same people that you did as well. And so, yeah, that was, and everyone just, how can pastors like, they would say pastors for Trump is an oxymoron. That doesn't even make sense, is what people would say. But, being around the president and his family, here's what I can tell you about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is one of the most generous people I have ever met in my life, with his time, with his resources. But here's a little story that I think speaks volumes about President Trump. A couple months ago, we were at the White House, and it was a small group of pastors or faith leaders, and one of them happened to be the new president of Liberty University. Now, if you remember back to 2016, one of the ground shaking endorsements was Jerry Falwell Jr. of Liberty University endorsing Donald Trump. I mean, that was a massive, earthquake within the political sector.
Where Ted Cruz launched his,
Right, right.
so it was,
So
oh, wow.
you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
And Jerry Falwell Jr. was a early supporter and all that, and then everyone knows he had a major falling, and now he's no longer the president of Liberty University. And so, from any like political strategy standpoint, Jerry Falwell Jr. would be toxic in regards to President Trump because of Falwell's scandal and falling and all that. And so the new president of Liberty University is there, and President Trump finds out, that's who he is. He's the new president of Liberty. And he stops everything. We're in the middle of a, just small talk with the president. He stops and he says, "How's my friend doing? I know he had a rough time. How's he doing?" And the new president, he's doing well. He's doing well. And President Trump says, "Do you guys, is he allowed on campus?" And yeah, he's allowed. And President Trump had a genuine concern for somebody who adds no value to him now politically. In fact, it would be a negative politically. But Donald Trump is a man, he really does care about people. Like, there is a genuine concern and a care for people. And so I've seen these things, behind, this is the stuff CNN would never report things like that, because that makes him look like a human being, makes him look like somebody that's got a heart. He cares about some scandalous preacher that had a major fallout that does not benefit Donald Trump at all. Yet there was a genuine, I want to know how he's doing, and asking these questions. And so things like that, you see that. And then with his family, I'm very good friends with Eric and Don, and these are good men. Donald Trump raised good children, which speaks volumes to him. Now, is he perfect? Is he filtered? No, not at all. But I think the thing, this is just my opinion, that drew so many pastors and Christians to Donald Trump was his authenticity. He was real. He said what he thought. He meant what he said, and I think that was so like refreshing within the world of, the poll says this, so say that. And Donald Trump was authentic, and so I think I think people are drawn towards authenticity, even if you may not agree necessarily with everything that he may say. And so that's kind of been my takeaway. And the president, whenever that bullet was fired in Butler, Pennsylvania, that radically changed his walk with the Lord. I'll tell you something funny. When you go into the Oval Office, there's two ways in. And so President Trump has put angels above those doors. Now they're gold, all right? They're gold angels. It's Trump, they're gold angels.
Right.
But every time visitors come in, it's the first thing he points at. He says, "Did you see those angels?" And he say, "You know why I put an angel above those doors? Because there was an angel with me on that day in Butler, Pennsylvania that saved my life." And he says it. God spared his life for a mission. He totally believes it. And so is he, a theologian and a scholar? No, not at all. Not at all. He is a New York billionaire who is now the president of the United States, but there is the seeking aspect, like what you said, the seeking aspect. And he surrounds himself with pastors,
Yeah.
which I think speaks a lot about him because he does not need us anymore. He is not trying to win the evangelical vote. He does not need us, yet he has requested us to be at the White House.
I think that is, it's so good to hear that. And I think what you nailed there, just from being for all the political strategists out there, his greatest strength, I think, was Kamala Harris's greatest weakness, is that what you said, his authenticity. Like it or not, he's going to tell you exactly what he's thinking. It's unvarnished. It's just, there it is. And Kamala Harris, there was constant uncertainty. You'd have to just dig, and you'd have to, what the burden she put on the American people was to try to figure out what was real and what was fiction. And people
Right.
that you go all the way down to the tiny little, I was talking about whenever I was on city council. I remember I used to hold town halls, and when I would disagree with someone on an issue, I would tell them, I say, look, I disagree with you on this. And if you stick around till we're done, I'm sure we'll disagree on a couple of other things, but you're always going to know where I stand. I'm not going to lie to you. It's just not worth it. And by the way, I said that as a so I was pretty young in that role. I think I was 35. And every politician, I don't care at what level you are, I think there's this inherent, or maybe it's just humans, like when people ask you something, you want to tell them what will make them happy,
Of course.
what's non-confrontational. So
Yep.
our default setting is don't cause a war. And as a result, you may try to soften the truth or something like that. But when you realize that what the American people really want is just, they want certainty. People hate uncertainty. And what you said, it's funny, all the things that the pundits and the media try to assume Trump is going to do, he almost never does. And, and the thing is, and that's even after they have asked him, what are you going to do? And he just tells them, sometimes and this is another thing too, all of my friends that are inside the White House or and close to him, like a lot of times they're sitting there going, oh my gosh, because he's just going to tell it like it is in a town where everybody is trying to hold their cards so close to the chest. He's like, here's my cards, and here's the one I'm going to play next. Who's in, And I think that's kind of the cool thing about it. And then also, you talking about his humanity. I think that's almost one of the reasons why he's so hated, is because he is just a human being willing to be human. I think a lot of people project on the fact that they wish that they could just be that blatantly authentic in their life. Right. And most of us can't. Most of us live our lives in the witness protection program of some sort.
Yeah, we all fear people. We want people to like us. We are people pleasers, right? And his personality is, he just says what he thinks, and if you like it, wonderful. If you don't, it is what it is. And so I think he was refreshing in a season where the American people had just dealt with so much fake and phony and all that kind of stuff. And so when he came out of the gate, just being him, I think that was a real attraction to a lot of people, say like myself. And so doesn't mean he's perfect. No, not at all. And he'll be the first to tell you that. But what it means is, at least you know where he stands, right? At least you know where he stands. And for me, that means the world.
So now let's take kind of a macro approach to the United States of America. We've lived through, the Charlie Kirk and just constant polarization in the country. I mean, there's some people that are just blatantly hostile to America, holding some of the highest positions of government leadership in our country. From your perspective, Jackson, and where we are in our nation, how do you see this moment in history and the church's role in it?
Well, I mean, right now we're living in such a great opportunity. So we are in a prime opportunity. I mean, there is a spiritual awakening that is happening in this country that you can literally measure with numbers right now. If you just look at Christian music downloads on Spotify, they're up 50%. Bible sales are up 40%. Christian app downloads, they're up 80%. So these are Christian apps, Christian songs, Bibles. The American public is consuming them in ways that we've not seen in a long, long time. And so something's happening spiritually in our country. Now, at the same time, that doesn't mean that the enemy just sits there and cheers us on. Oh man, I'm so glad that there's a spiritual awakening happening in America. No, 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 no. So as there is this rise in hunger for God and truth, there's also going to be a rise in wickedness and evil. And so I kind of look at it, with the early church. You would think that persecution would slow down the spreading of the gospel. Like, why would people want to sign up for something that could get them imprisoned or even killed? And, the Roman Empire learned the hard way. For every 10 Christians they killed, they produced 100 new Christians. And that is what we're seeing right now. There is a persecution, Charlie Kirk kind of being the face of that, because, people will say Charlie got assassinated for his political beliefs, but I'm of the opinion Charlie got assassinated because he was a preacher of the God. He was the youth pastor to America. Like, let's call it what he was, America's youth pastor. And but the Charlie Kirk effect is real. I mean, we're seeing it. Churches across the country are having record attendance. It's a beautiful thing, but we also have to realize it is a battle. There's a spiritual battle, good and evil. So when we see evil rising, we have to understand that we are in this spiritual war that we're in, but it's an opportunity. People are looking for truth. Our country tried wokeism, and now we are in a complete different direction. People have rejected it. That didn't work. So, but you have to have something to fill that void. And that's where the church, this is not a political issue. This is a church issue, to be bold in this moment and to declare the truth of God's word, which I do believe has an inherent power in and of itself, that it will inherently attract people because it is truth. Now, there will be those that hate it, those that despise it, that will do everything to try to stop it. But man, I'll tell you, as a pastor and as a Christian, what an exciting time to be alive. We're like seeing true spiritual awakening that we've prayed for years.
And with that, I would like to segue into your new book, which I think is incredibly important for a time such as this. And before, one of the things you mentioned in the book is platform culture. It's kind of what you talk about, which is kind of interesting because before Facebook, before Instagram, before Twitter, before TikTok, before the era of the platform culture, the probably the leading influencers were the pastors. I mean, let's face it, going all the way back to ancient times, the first scholars, the first thinkers, the first true influencers, that's like the OG platform, if you will.
Yep.
Right?
Literally.
And so I think that that's really cool that you as a pastor are taking on this topic. So let's talk a little bit about Chasing After the Wind. Why did you write it? What does it entail? And kind of unpack this idea of platform culture and why it can be so detrimental to our society as a whole.
Well, I titled the book Chasing After the Wind. It's not original with me. There was an old king named Solomon that wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. And in chapter 2, he gives an autobiography. Talks about how he had more money than anyone before him. He had more women than he could count. He tried to satisfy his heart with wine, building projects, and he did all these things. And in his older age, he looked back and he said it was all chasing the wind. He was chasing happiness his entire life. He tried to become happy through money, women, fame, building projects, you name it. He tried it all. And he said, I chased the wind. And that's what we're all doing. All of us want to be happy. That's literally why we do. Why do I eat Oreos late at night? Is it because they're good for me? No, not at all. They make me feel good. That's we're all chasing happiness, and we have sometimes, unfortunately, bought into the lie that money can make you happy, or a marriage can make you happy, or and they can for a moment. The problem is happiness is like the wind. It's elusive. You think you caught it and then boom, you got to go somewhere else. And so we're always chasing the wind, but we never actually catch it. And so all of us will be like Solomon. We'll look back on our lives and say, I did this. And sometimes the pursuit of happiness leads to terrible decisions. You think that drugs, no, listen, nobody becomes a drug addict because they want to be unhappy. It's the promise of happiness within it, or becoming, no one becomes an alcoholic because they're like, oh, I want to be an alcoholic. That's not how it works. We want to be happy. And so we try things, and then they can lead to very unholy decisions. And so the book is all about, how do you catch the wind? How can you are designed to be happy? You are that's God has designed. God's the happiest being there is. You're created in his image and likeness. You're designed to be happy. But how can you have true lasting joy and happiness? And so that's why I wrote the book, because it's been my own journey. I've tried so many things that I thought, as a pastor, if I just had 100 more members, well, then I'd be happy. And you get 100 more members and you realize their problems are now your problem. You're like, oh, if I just had a bigger building, we just had a bigger building, I would be happy. You get the bigger building, your utilities are way more, your expenses are way more. And so you're on this constant pursuit of chasing happiness, and you get what you think will make you happy. And it makes you happy for a moment, but then it's gone. And so, how can you have real joy? Because in this life, you have to have joy. You have to. The Bible says the joy of the Lord is our strength. And so if I'm going to have strength to withstand the crazy world that we live in, I've got to have joy. But where do you get that from? And the Bible is very clear. In the presence of God, that's where the fullness of joy is. A joy that is not fleeting, it's not elusive. And so that's why I wrote the book, because it was really my own journey of, I thought all these different things would make me happy. And they did for a moment, but they were all fleeting. And this book has really resonated with a ton of people. Darryl Strawberry, the great baseball player, he wrote the foreword to the book because that was his journey. Here you have a legendary baseball player that found himself trying to fill a void of happiness through drugs and sex and money. And he wound up being suspended 3 times from the major leagues, imprisoned without a driver's license, and $3 million in debt. And when he hit rock bottom, he discovered where true joy comes from. And he's a tremendous preacher of the gospel now. His story is so powerful. And so that's why I wrote the book, Chasing After the Wind, just to kind of, help people discover that money, sex, fame, especially we think if I have a large following on social media, I'll be happy. And that is the furthest. I would say the more people you have following you on social media, the less happy you will probably be in life. And so platform culture is dangerous because you put an image of who you want to be out there, but it's not who you are. You live behind a filter. You put a smile on for the picture that you had to take 600 times till you get the perfect picture. And so we're like our own producers, actors, editors within our own highlight reel to go on social media, but it's fake. It's not real. And we're trying to impress other people who are living behind a filter as well. We're in this vicious cycle. And so that's what the book is about. And I get very practical. How do you walk this out, and how do you actually experience this? And obviously, I have not fully arrived at the destination, so I'm no expert on it, but it's been my journey and what the Bible says. And so, yeah, chasing after the wind, man. It's gotten very good reviews.
Well, it's such an important message, and I am so glad you wrote the book, and I can relate so much to it, man. Like forever, I'm 50 now, but and through most of my early years, a lot of the reasons why, Well, I mentioned earlier that I went to SMU for business school. Now, that's been a blessing to me later on, but I can tell you, I didn't go to SMU because I wanted to go into private equity. I thought this was the credential. I'll learn what I need to learn. I'll go on and I'll crush deals all over. I mean, I thought maybe that would happen, but really, if I'm honest with myself, which I try to be, is I went to SMU because I went to SFA for undergrad, which I didn't think was prestigious enough. I thought if I go to SMU, Cox School of Business, that will validate me. And after that's done, I'll be happy. I'll be able to roll up into Highland Park and network with all the fellow SMU guys. And what I found was none of them care that unless it just happens to come up in the conversation. I certainly wasn't any happier than before I went to school. It's the same thing with every other thing I've ever pursued. And I'll never forget Zig Ziglar. One of his famous sayings is, wherever you go, there you are. It does, whoever you are, it doesn't matter if you get that bigger house, if you get that different car, it's still you that's there. And so I love that message. And because I think you're exactly right. We have now with social media, like when I was growing up, man, you knew the people in town whose parents maybe had money, but you didn't really care. And you didn't really think, because you didn't look at everybody's meal that they eat, every vacation they take, every new handbag that they buy, every pair of sneakers they buy. You didn't see all that. They just happened to show up on the first day of school when we all had our new school clothes on. And then we just kind of forgot about it. Now everything is on display. And it's this curated life that we see other people's curating as though it's theirs, but really it's all so fake. And I don't know about you, Jackson, but one of the things that I've really learned the older that I've gotten is, man, it's one, the deeper my walk is with the Lord, then truly the things of this world do slowly fade. Now that doesn't mean that they don't come back into beautiful, whatever the most pixels possible, it will come right before you. But if you just turn away and you just focus on the Lord and you focus on family and then contentment. I'll never forget one of my favorite shows of all time, man, was Seinfeld. And love Seinfeld. I mean, I can quote every episode, every line obnoxiously. Don't watch Seinfeld with me because I'll get on your nerves because I'm going to quote every line. And I remember whenever Jerry was about to end the show, and he's on top, still the #1 rated sitcom. And I think it was an interview with Katie Couric. And she talked about how, I believe the offer was $5 million an episode, probably at the time the most that had ever been offered to anyone. And she said, $5 million an episode. How do you turn that down? And Jerry said, it's money. He said, what do I need more money for? He said, I'm content. And he said, I've been content since I was selling umbrellas in Manhattan on the sidewalk during the day and doing my act at night. All I ever wanted to do was make enough money doing stand-up for that to be my real job. And I've been doing that for a long time. He said, so what do I need more money for? Now, it's real easy for Jerry to say at that point. He's a multi-millionaire. but what Jerry Seinfeld, and if you read his, I think his book, Is This Anything? I think that's what it's called. It kind of takes you through his story of being a little kid obsessed with comedy, and then as a teenager going and working clubs. It was never, I want to be a billionaire like he is at this point, so here's what I'll do comedy. No, it's like, I just want to do comedy. I want to be, and that was the contentment. I think if people will hone in on loving what you have and being thankful and expressing gratitude, I think that's part of it. I mean, it's taken me a long time, but man, the older I get, the more I realize just looking for experiences, not chasing after the wind, because you're exactly right. It's like trying to grab a handful of Jell-O. It's just, and you almost quoted the wise words of the great Don Draper, who said whenever he was in a meeting at Sterling Cooper, what is happiness? Happiness is just something you feel before you want more happiness. It's so true.
Exactly. Man. And being content. My wife would always get on me. You're never content. We would set out to accomplish something and we would do it. And then it was like, all right, what's next?
Yeah.
and it was never enough, ever. No matter how big the church got, no matter how successful the ministry or whatever it literally it was just never enough. And I think all of us are kind of like that, right? We're always needing more because we're truly never content. And I think it's a vicious thing within American culture specifically. And so that'll make you miserable. And if you are miserable, you'll be zapped of joy, you'll be zapped of strength, and you will easily fall within a time period where you really need strength in these days. I mean, like, we live in a crazy, the world has just intensified in craziness. And, that's why do so many people fall for temptation? It's because temptation promises you what? Happiness. That's what that is the promise of sin. And the thing is, it does make us happy for a moment. That's why we go back to it. But the ramifications, the long-term consequences make you absolutely miserable. And so, I wrote the book just from my own journey up to this point, and I got a long ways to go. But it was something the Lord kind of laid on my heart. It was developed out of a sermon that I preached that really resonated, with my church body, and it became a book. And I'd love to send you a copy,
Please.
and yeah, I'd send you one, and give me some feedback on what you think.
Oh, I will absolutely do that. I can't wait. Now, let's talk about some, like, how do you in practical terms, Jackson? I mean, because look, here's one of the things that's going to be tough for you. And it's there's different areas where people will chase this happiness. You've got, I raised two daughters. They're 24 and 25. They're both gainfully employed, graduated from college. I am so proud of my daughters, but I watched them they were on the edge of the social media, just craziness that right now there's these 15, 16-year-old girls, dudes to some degree, but I hear it all the time, the studies with girls. There's this group that's chasing happiness and gauging their lives against Instagram
Yeah.
as to where their happiness lies. Then you've got guys like you and I, for that matter. We're type A, we're achievers. We want to use our spiritual gifts to the highest and best of our abilities, and that can sometimes confuse us into thinking, well, it's not only I'll be happier when I reach that next rung, whatever that is, but also it's what I'm supposed to do. I've got the giftings for it. So you got to control that. So putting the teenage girl aside, unless you want to cover that, for you as a leader and someone who is going to always be tempted by, I mean, dude, when I was growing up, man, we posted, I don't think they do this anymore, but do you remember that when the church had the little ledger up at the front of the church with the attendee last Sunday in,
Oh yeah.
in worship, Sunday school, and I think even offerings that were, it's like,
Yes.
we were managing what was measured back in the day, man. The church knew how to do that. So it's just been part of our culture. In practical terms, how do you keep yourself grounded and focused on contentment without complacency? I think that's a thing
Yes.
too, that people can hide behind this. Well, you know what? I'm content. And so therefore,
Whatever will be, will be, yeah.
how do you kind of work through that?
Yeah. So, like you said, with my personality, being complacent would never really fly, just because that's my personality, and that's, God wired me in this way. So, but your greatest strength also easily becomes your greatest weakness, and so never being content is a great weakness of mine. And so, for me, I have come to, and not fully there. I dare not sound like I have arrived, because definitely not. But recognizing that what God has called me to do, I do it to my fullest as unto the Lord. And the results, really, God gets to dictate. And so sometimes you give it everything you have and it doesn't work out. And you question, like, did God tell me to do that? And, like, I think God told me to do that, and I gave everything I had, but the results were not something that I want to be content with. And learning to deal with, sometimes the results are God's determination, the effort and the obedience, that's kind of my role. That's what I do for him. And so balancing that is nearly impossible. It, it's and you're constantly, one moment you get it right, and you're like, I think I got this down, and then the very next moment you completely flub and fell, and you're just like, oh my gosh, Lord, help me. And so I always see myself kind of like Simon Peter. Simon is the guy that gets it wrong all the time. Peter's the guy that gets it right occasionally. Peter walks on water. Simon sinks beneath the waves. And so that's kind of how I see myself. But here's what I've come to discover, that God is not just the God of the good Jackson or the Peter. He is also the God of Simon. And that's why it's constantly Jesus refers to him as Simon and Peter. He's the God of both. He's the God when I got it together. He's the God of when I don't have it together. And my goal is not, this is where I struggle. My goal is not perfection. My goal is progression, that I am growing, obviously with the full realization that this side of heaven, I don't think I'm ever going to hit that perfect mark. I don't think I am. But I'm progressing. Am I growing in my relationship with God, which is going to grow me as an individual? And so for me, perfection is like, I kind of have like OCD. Everything's got it. Like we were talking earlier today about how I didn't like that my camera has like it's because it bothers me because it's not perfect. And sometimes you got to be content in the progression, and knowing that you're striving for what God's called you to do, but the goal is progression. And for so many people, I think what social media does is it puts an image of perfection. Think about, I can make myself look perfect. That's why I got to take 600 pictures before I post one, and then I got to spend 45 minutes editing that one picture. But it's perfect. It's perfect, and it's a lie. It's a lie. And when you live behind a lie, you're miserable. And I've learned that firsthand. I can speak to that as a firsthand witness. That living a lie, that double life, that image outside, but that inner warfare inside, you'll never be happy. You'll never be happy at all. And that God wants you happy.
Man, I tell you, I'm pumped, dude. Yeah, as a pastor, I got to give you some kudos. I have never heard anyone use the Simon Peter reference the way you did, as kind of the evolving versus the one that's kind of arrived. And we all do that. And I think we as Christians, leaders, husbands, fathers, always, especially if you're that type A person, you hold yourself to that higher standard all the time. And when you fail, it can just wash over you with such
Oh,
defeat, and I think that's good, man. Well done.
I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. I love that. And so while we're on the topic of I don't want to let you go without assuming that, because my podcast, I talk to so many different people, man. There's no way people dive in here thinking, people know my faith. I don't hide my faith, but they very well may not know, depending on what I title this episode, that, who you are and what you're about. But for that would-be believer out there that completely has it just twisted based on media accounts, based on culture, where they grew up, of what the Christian life is and what it means to follow Christ. I mean, I don't want to let this episode end without having the opportunity to just picture that avatar out there, that person that might be tuning into this going, oh gosh, I thought Jason was going to talk about health and wellness. Now I find out he's a Jesus freak, and I don't even know how I'm still listening to this. And now he's got this Jackson Lahmeyer dude on there. Wow, and he went to Oral Roberts, and well, that's just what the heck is going on? But I'm going to listen anyway because I'm kind of, for some reason, liking what these dudes are saying. With that, man, Jackson, will you just take the opportunity to talk to that person out there that might be a baby in Christ, might be confused because we are living in such nutty, crazy times, and they see there is a line being drawn, and they're like, and they feel, because you alluded to it earlier, we're made to worship. That's how we're wired. It's like a magnetic force between, and unfortunately, there's just the positive and the negative is out there, and so many people are getting clung to the wrong thing to where they almost make gods and idols of these demonic things. But there's this longing in us. So there might be somebody out there that's going, I might want to look a little further. Jackson and Jason sound like pretty cool dudes. They don't sound like they're going to go handle snakes after they get through with this. And,
I thought we were doing that at the end. I thought the snake handling came at the end of the show.
It'll be a whole nother episode. I'll bring snakes. We'll go nuts, man. But no. And by the way, anybody out there that heard that, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but that's how people look at us, folks. You just got to own it sometimes. What do you say to some of those folks, man? Just to kind of, I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with that. I know I babbled on, but really I hope you hear what I'm saying. It's like, just talk to that person that needs to hear something like, it's okay if you decide to follow Jesus. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, I think something that unfortunately the Christians and the church have kind of done a little damage here is that we've all got it together. And if you want to become part of us, you better get it all together. And, I always tell people, if you're looking for a perfect church, do not ever attend because you're going to mess up what they got going on. You are not perfect. I am not perfect. And what that means is we don't go to God once we get it together. All right, once I get this together, then I'll go to God and he'll accept me. It's not how it works because you'll never get it together. The good news is God meets you right where you're at. So wherever you are on your journey in life, your journey may be that, you grew up in church and you've kind of walked away. God will meet you right there. Your journey may be you have never stepped foot in a church door. You have never read the Bible. God will meet you right where you are. He'll meet you where you are. And so the best thing that you can do is take that first step, whatever the first step in your case may be. Maybe that is for some to go back to a church. You haven't been in a while, go back, check it out, get involved. Find it, obviously there are churches that are maybe better than others. It's an obvious thing, but listen, for the most part, 99% of the churches out there are going to be a great place to get plugged into, to get involved. You need a community of people. And for those who are skeptical, I would just encourage you to either one, go get a Bible and just begin reading it for yourself in the New Testament. Or if you don't like reading, this has really helped a lot of people. A lot of people feel like they're letting God down because they're like, I should read the Bible, but I don't like to read. And so I feel like I'm letting God down. Well, stop trying to read the Bible. Go listen to it. You got to realize for 1,500 years, no Christian read the Bible besides those that were in either priests or pastors or scholars. They listen to it. And faith comes by hearing and hearing God's word. And so if you don't like to read, stop trying to force something that may not be there right now. And there's so many Bible apps that you could just listen to the Bible and you may be shocked. You may be shocked at what takes place. And so I think it's a good starting point is just try it. Try the Bible. Try a local church. And you may be surprised if you go in with an open mind and an open heart. And God will meet you right where you're at. You don't have to wait till you have it together to go to God because that's not how it works. God became like us so that in return we could become like him. And that's the good news. That's the gospel right there, that God was willing to step out of heaven and to join us here on earth. And he did 2,000 years ago. And now in return, we can take a step towards him and be with him forever. And so I would just encourage you, wherever you are in life, just take that first step. Whatever that first step is for you in your journey, take it, and you might be surprised in a good way.
I love it, brother. I love it, brother. And and kind of like, have supernatural expectations for God and realistic expectations for his followers, and you'll
That's the key.
Right.
That's the key.
You'll be all right.
God is God, and realize none of his followers are. We're on a journey.
That's absolutely right. All right. So, Jackson, Chasing After the Wind, how do people find the book, keep in touch with you, follow you, listen to you have your own podcast, or I know your messages are online, right? So how do people connect with you?
Yeah, well, so the book right here, Chasing After the Wind, if you go to my website, jacksonlahmeyer.com, I'll send you a signed copy. Now, if you go to Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Books A Million, it's not signed, but it's like the same price. And so you can get a signed copy and you get the free ebook if you go to my website. So you get the digital version as well as the book version. But in regards to sermons, my website as well, jacksonlahmeyer.com, all of our sermons are up. We do verse by verse teaching at my church. So we're going through the Gospel of Matthew right now, verse by verse. We just finished the book of Acts. And so if you like the Bible, you want to understand the Bible a little bit better, those messages would help you. And then I'm obviously on social media, on the different platforms, and I'm trying to be real. I'm not trying to fake it till I make it type of thing. And, but it's still a struggle. I want to make sure that picture looks good before I post it, and there's that thing. And so, but yeah, man, thank you so much for having me on. I love your heart. Love what you're doing, and I really enjoyed this.
Well, Jackson, it was great having you, brother. And don't be a stranger. I'd love to have you back anytime.
Absolutely, absolutely.
There's more writing in you, and don't wait till you write another book. But anytime you do, the platform is yours. And for the folks out there listening, thank you so much for listening to the Jason Wright Show. And I will absolutely put all the contact information for the book, the download, the signed copy, all that will be in the show notes. And thank you for what you're doing, brother. Godspeed.
Thank you.
Well, that does it for this episode of the Jason Wright Show. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a Texas Titan Media production. Fourth Wall did the music. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Please consider going out to jasonwrightnow.com and signing up for the Vitruvian letter. Also, please go out to iTunes. It takes like 30 seconds to just leave us a 5-star rating. It does wonders for the podcast. I would be so grateful. And with that, until we meet again, go crush it and endeavor to improve always in all ways. I'm out.